I'm going to talk to you about being a change-making educator, and especially a change-making educator when it comes to photography and when it comes to teaching media technology. I got into education because I wanted to change the world. These days, everyone seems to be talking about how education, especially education in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, can change the world. But we also know there are schools and teachers in our lives that we'd rather forget. You know, I'm sure we all know, those who encourage rote learning. 2 times 4 equals 8. Those kind of things we repeat. Or worse still, who were taught by perhaps some religious zealots or some rich Westerners who saw their role as to save you. So how can we avoid that? What does it really take to be a change-making educator, especially in science and technology fields? What does it take to help people not just do new things, but to do things differently, and in so doing, to change their world? To answer this, I want to tell you a bit about my own journey, and especially the journey I've undertaken in the last year or so, where I've been teaching photography, and where I've been teaching it outside of perhaps where it would normally be taught in such places as universities and colleges. I've been teaching photography in community media groups, in after-school clubs, at feminist organizations. This was a small part of a PhD project I'm doing concerning the power of photography. I don't want to trouble you with my PhD thesis now. Suffice to say that you don't need to be a doctoral student to appreciate some of the lessons I learned on this journey. At the beginning, I thought I would be teaching technology. I thought I would be teaching this thing called the camera, how shutter speeds work, how apertures work, how to change the format of a picture on Photoshop, what button A does on a digital camera, why you should press button A and when you should definitely not press button B. In practice, I saw myself as a bit of an expert. I thought that I had knowledge and that because I was in this fortunate position to have knowledge, I could impart this knowledge to others. I guess I thought I was a bit of an expert. And I guess I thought by sharing my expertise, I was doing good. But it's a very small distance to travel from the thought, I am an expert teaching people who don't know much, to I am saving people, to I am better than them. And that's a very dangerous thing to think, because you end up thinking almost that you're saving your students or your learners from themselves. I quickly learned it's not all about that. It's not all about technology, not all about shutter speeds and white balance. Or at least those things are a secondary consideration, an enabler. It was about being a strategy creator, helping people, especially disadvantaged people, come up with ways to get the public to see them differently. Like in these photos, looking for new angles and new ways, both literally and figuratively. Photography, after all, and the media more generally, have this power, albeit limited by your audience's existing worldview, to alter, to influence people's views of others, people's views of themselves. So what I realized is it was my job to help my students to help their audience see them differently. But before I could do that, I had to learn to see them differently too. In this regard, I can think of some beautiful women from Namibia's San community, the so-called Bushmen, Namibia's first inhabitants, and still for the most part among the poorest of the poor when it comes to Namibians. Namibians who are hardly seen in national debates and in the national discourse. Many of these women, their early childhood photos were not, as might be the case for you or me, taken by aunts and uncles and grandfathers and grandmothers. Their childhood photos were taken by foreign tourists. They were the ones who had cameras. They were the ones who'd come to these remote communities, wanting to take pictures with a real live bushman, take pictures of them with the San people in their traditional dress, in their villages. So how do you help people like that take ownership of their own image making and their own identity? One of the ways we did this with one group is we ended up hanging out at a curio shop, a tourist curio shop in Windhoek that sold a lot of Bushman artifacts and had representations of rock paintings on their walls and a statue, a sculpture of a Bushman with a bow and arrow. We resolved to take pictures there so that my students could say that, yes, this is who we are. Knowing how to make fire and all that is part of our heritage. But there's also more than that. We also wear modern clothes. We also go to school. So they went there in their smart clothes with their school books. So that's what I realized that photography and that teaching photography was really about. Challenging people's entrenched beliefs. I can think of also dealing with people from the Gurianghab area, which, as you may know, is a very poor area, an area with lots of shacks, an area with Evelyn Street, where you can get just about anything you want if you can pay for it. But how do you help people from that area promote their humanity, to promote the humanity of that area, to show not only the bars and the violence and the chaos and the poverty, but also, for example, children playing in the street, or people building houses out of their meager savings? How do you help them to display the friendships and the neighborliness which is still found in this part of town? But for me to suggest any of this, I had to put down some of the ideas I had, coming from a posh part of town myself. Another example is, how do you help lesbian women to take pictures to portray themselves? If you ever want some salaciousness, do a Google image search for lesbian women. The sort of pictures you find mostly are like the color one there, very pornographic or borderline pornographic. There's hardly any image like the black and white one, showing loving relationships, showing real people. So how do you help lesbian women who are preparing an exhibition of their own work? How do you warn them of some of these dangers while remembering that they are still people who still have romantic lives and sex lives? How do you do any of this as a heterosexual male who's never had to face any of the kind of discrimination that they have? I don't have all the answers. What I do know is that a process of reflection is necessary. Jonathan Jansen is the rector of the University of the Free State. He's written a book recently called Knowledge in the Blood. And he talks about the importance of cognitive dissonance in learning, about challenging people's cherished beliefs. Cognitive dissonance is what occurs where people get hold of new information that challenges perhaps inherited beliefs, stereotypes. The task of educators, Jansen says, is to create a safe space where this cognitive dissonance can happen, where it can be pedagogic dissonance. In other words, where it can be something that helps people learn, not just something that makes people feel bad. Because if you've always believed something about, say, lesbians or people from poor parts of Katutura, and that is challenged, it may be confusing. It may hurt you to some extent. I've known this all my life. How can it be wrong? And even if you're from some of these groups, you may find that you've internalized some of these stereotypes. So it can be a very difficult process to deal with. The job of the educator is to make the classroom or the boardroom or wherever he or she is teaching into a safe space for that questioning to take place. Some of those beliefs are very well challenged with photographs, or these photographs are from the National Archives of Namibia. and are taken in northern Namibia in the late 1910s. A whole crowd of people posing around some South African Air Force biplanes. And when people first look at this photo in many of the discussions that I've had in photo groups that I've taught, people have thought, oh, it's about the coming of technology and people bringing new things from outside. It takes a bit of thinking to think, oh no, but these planes just bombed a rebel stronghold somewhere. They were used for colonial control. So maybe this is a picture about colonialism. My point is that the meaning of a picture is always negotiable. Audiences always negotiate with it, with the meaning. People have got to realize how that negotiation works. And in order to deal with how that negotiation works, they've got to deal with where they come from. In order to help people take pictures which will more than likely be interpreted positively, I've got to deal with where I come from. I've got to deal with how privilege limits my view of the world. According to social scientist Peggy McIntosh, privilege is an invisible, weightless backpack. It contains provisions, passports, visas, things that help you on your way through life. If you've got them, it allows you to think of life in a certain way. It allows you to think of life as easy. I had to step back and say, how would I think of these situations if I wasn't a white, middle-class, male, heterosexual African who's been given a lot of advantages over other Africans? It's not always easy to do that, but you've got to try. If you can't do it, you can't help your students challenge other privileged people with their photos. To do this, you've got to strip away some of your own conditioning from an education system, a media system that is largely organized by people with privilege. In the end, I realized a big part of being a change-making educator and encouraging people to challenge patterns of privilege, to challenge what they think they know, is laying down your own ego, putting down the cult of the celebrity professor, the photographic artist, the famous journalist. Rather, it's more important to let people talk through you, talk past you, and even talk beyond you without denying your own feelings. When you do this, you open yourself up to be used by people who are perhaps more disadvantaged or more marginalized. You allow yourself to be used by people to tell their stories rather than telling your own story. When you do that, I think you've succeeded as a teacher and a learner of technology. Thank you.